I am used to seeing art that makes me look at the world in a different way. But on April 8th, 2016, I spent an afternoon with an artist who is making me look at life in a different way.
My name is Anne Minich. I have been an artist most of my life. I became interested in what I was doing when I was a very young child. I took some time off between a few years of art school until I was about 35, and then I went back to painting after I'd had 3 children. I've lived here and worked here in this house in Philadelphia for about 35 years. The artistic life for me has been in some ways very difficult. I've never had much money. I also consider being able to be an artist who does only what she wants to be a very, very luxurious way to live, to be. The first drawing that I ever did, I was 5 or 6 years old, maybe even younger. The drawing was of a penis peeing with a roll of toilet paper. And I was thrilled, and I showed it to my father, and he said, that's wonderful, what is it? And I told him, and he lost it. He was very clear about the fact that I was never to do any such thing like that ever again. And I have continued to do so most of my drawing life. I wasn't going to let something like that stop me.
Anne's father did have great pride in his daughter, saying that she would become the next Mary Cassatt.
And I always thought, well, I'm going to become the first Anne Graham, my name was, Sissy Graham.
In the early 1950s, when Anne was 16, she attended a summer program at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. After high school, she enrolled there as a full-time student.
I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was desperately trying to do what they wanted me to do.
But she just didn't relate to much of it.
The only training that I credit as being a deep part of me is the drawing from the casts and the drawings from the figure I was fascinated by. That all made sense to me. Everything that the instructors talked about, looking at form. The drawing from the models was the most fun. To be able just to sit there and stare at a naked body and draw anything you damn well chose. I was thrilled by it. It wasn't an academic thing. I felt like I was totally involved with the person in a way. I was painting at the Academy, and it was this woman standing in front of me, and it was just wonderful, and I was deeply involved in the pubic hair, and I was just lost, and I was never so happy in my life. And Francis Spate came up to me and looked for a while, and then he said, "It's not necessary to put that kind of concentration in that area of the body." And I believed him. It didn't stop me from doing it, but I thought, oh, that's a rule. That's an Academy rule. There was a woman when I was there, and she was making these absolutely beautiful plaster things, and then she was coloring them. I was fascinated by it, and I thought I want to be like that. And I spoke to somebody, and they said, she's a lesbian. And I was so literal when I was young, and I thought, oh, I'm not, so I'm not going to be any good. I mean, that's how I translated stuff like that. So, and the best thing that I did was I left after 2 years. I was told that if I left, I would never get back to painting again, and I truly believed it. I got married. I had 3 children. My husband at the time was the chaplain of Episcopal students at the University of Miami. I was able to get into the Miami art department for free. I went back with no expectations and just pure gratitude that I had managed to do what I was told I wouldn't be able to do. I started out working in the print department, which is where I got my ideas about the very fine kind of drawing and the very obsessive way that I draw, because I was very anxious to have the kind of line that I envisioned with fine etching. When I did lithography, I got more of my ideas for drawing from that, and when I left the print department, I had to start translating all that into drawings. So I did for 5 or 6 years mostly this very elaborate pencil work, graphite on smooth paper, always hot press.
Though Anne's artistic life was getting back on track, her married life was a different story.
I hit the road from Miami. I had a white van, and there were about 3 months when that van was my home. I had carried my drawing table and my cat and a few other things.
From the mid-70s until 1981, when she settled in Philadelphia, Anne lived for periods in Berkeley, Weehawken, and New York City. Throughout the decades, she has developed various bodies of work.
I do work in series, but there's not a time frame connected to the series. I started being conscious of working in series when I started doing pieces that were like altar pieces. When I had gone to Berkeley, I had my head shaved. I was in some kind of mode where I was thinking about women who had their head shaved. It was shaming them. And I had left my husband and left my children and left all that kind of thing. And I loved the image. My head has a very good shape to it. So I started doing work that was built around my head, and then eventually it evolved into an iconic head shape. I made headpieces for a long time. And then seeing the World Trade Center, the plane that went constantly and over and over and over again, I was fascinated with that loop. So I started doing plane images, and of course hotly denied that they had anything to do with 9/11, which of course they did. I was collecting found material on a beach in Maine that looked like boat shapes. So I started making constructions with boats. And I realized that a boat image embodies almost everything that I think about. A boat shape is a female shape. It's a container. A lot of my boat images have little bones that are up in the front of them, and that's actually made of bone, those little things, and it's a joke about having a bone. My initial motivation for that whole series came from the Arnold Böcklin painting of the Isle of the Dead, where a boat shape with a little figure at the helm is going into an area that are like two mountains. When I first saw it, I was about 12 years old, and I remember being fascinated by the image, seeing it as a very sexual image, but I couldn't have articulated that it was sexual. In all my boat paintings, I'm working with the idea of being in the last quadrant of my life, and the boats are all going towards eventual deaths. Not sure that I'm finished with the boat image. I'm getting to the age where I have to be very careful about what I start. I also have a big project.
Anne's referring to a large-scale portrait of some collectors.
That's going to take a long while if I do it the way I really want to do it. So I'm frankly scared to start any more boat images right now. I think that my work is not like other people's work. From the time I was a child, I loved to make arrangements of things, and I loved to build things with my hands. There was always a sculptural element to the way I was thinking. I used the paint to create a certain surface and a certain color, almost decorative in a way. And I don't call myself a painter, really. When I first started painting, it was on board because I wanted to carve into the wood. I carve with a #1 X-Acto blade. I go through many a year. My drawing I consider my most unique offering. And I'm hoping next year there will be a show of something called the California Prison System at PAFA. They were done in the 70s. Bob Casalino, when he first saw it, said that it anticipated a lot of what's going on today. When I did the drawings, they were pure me. I was not bouncing off of anybody. I wasn't able to make etchings, so I was going to make them in drawings instead. I was listening to text music in Berkeley at the time. Very fascinated with the idea of making words that made you think another word. One of the California drawings makes use of the word C-U-T period, and some people see the word cunt.
I asked Anne about her themes and how people react to her art.
It's wonderful when people know what I'm doing, understand what I'm doing. It means little or nothing to me if they don't like it. I don't take things like that personally. I'm well aware that everybody has their own idea of how things should be and how they shouldn't be. I'm a believer in the fact that people believe in God. The whole concept and iconography of Christianity in many ways rules the way I think about my work. There's a man who runs the Museum of Contemporary Religious Art in St. Louis, Father Terence Dempsey, a Jesuit. I told him that I was worried about making heretical art. And he said that wasn't my problem to worry about it. My thing was to do the art, to make the art. I don't believe that people can make spiritual art. If there is spirituality in art or in anything we do, it has to come naturally. If there is spirituality in my work, it's because it comes through whatever my being is. I don't claim that I'm able to do that. Sexuality, obviously, is a totally different thing because I'm quite sure of my experience and what I think I know and don't know. My work is very informed by the fact that I'm a woman, in the same way that sunsets are informed by the sun going down. I have very serious feelings about the power of women and the necessity of women to eventually get over some of the stuff that has been bred into the bone. Sexuality, there isn't anything that I've ever done that in some way doesn't refer to it. Real art comes from the ability of a man or a woman to acknowledge and give voice to whatever their other is. There's a part of me that's very deeply masculine, and I allow it because I think it takes both genders to actually make a single piece of art.
Looking at some of your drawings, the genitalia sometimes seems ambiguous.
It is, intentionally. Of all the permutations of gender there is, I've been fascinated with it from the time I was a child, before I even understood what I was fascinated by, and always resistant to the fact that there was any one such idea of what a woman was or any one such idea of what a man was.
You earlier said that you were influenced by a fellow student who was a lesbian. Did you ever try that?
A couple of times. I sometimes think of myself as having the mind of a lesbian. Physically, it was men. And I'm frankly not sure that if I was a young woman today, the prohibition when I was a young woman against any kind of homosexuality was intense. I mean, part of me would say, well, I don't think that's true. And then another part of me would say, well, it must be true because they're saying so. So I had to grow out of that.
You are living in this house by yourself. Do you get lonely?
No. I had serial relationships for many years up until 2000. And they were all bad. I'm not a good partner. I don't get along well with people. I love living alone. I consider it easier to live it alone than to have to live with somebody and take into account what their needs are. I'm not good at it.
How have you kept afloat financially?
Mostly doing grunt jobs. I've worked as a house cleaner. I have a little bit of family money off and on over the years, occasionally sell. And then when I moved here to Philadelphia, I had to do something, so I went to work for Taw's Art Supply for many years, and it was horrible in many ways, and yet I love them. I love the whole family, because for the first time in my life, I was having to face reality. I was having to do things I didn't want to do. I was having to do what other people were telling me to do. And I was ready for it, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I got some of my best work done when I was working there because I'd come home and work at night. This was what was good about living alone. If I wanted to go to McDowell for 6 weeks, they gave me off. I was not a great employee, but Barrandov were always respectful of artists that worked for them. The first grant that I got that made a huge difference in my life was Lee Alter's grant for painters. And then she bought 2 of my pieces for her collection. They're at PAFA now. When I had cancer, I won a Pollock Krasner, and I also got a one-time emergency Gottlieb.
Anne Minich is an 81-year-old free spirit. She was treated for cancer 3 years ago and has some other serious health issues. I am 63 years old and deeply neurotic. How can she bear her travails, I wondered.
I have a certain amount of disassociation with almost anything that could attack me. I get along very well because I'm always in a huge amount of denial. I have a very serious problem in my neck right now that needs surgery, and we can't deal with it until we get the heart thing, and it means that as we sit here, I could potentially keel over.
Please don't.
I have I have no sense of that. So it's not causing me anxiety.
When I first walked into Anne's home and saw how tiny she is, less than 5 feet tall, I was quite surprised. Why? I had seen the self-portrait she calls Feral Nun, and it is truly monumental. She depicted herself after cancer treatment.
I'm sure many women would be horrified, but I was so fascinated with the way my body looked, ravaged like that, and everything about it.
Anne had had photos taken of herself for reference, and when she went into the store to pay for them, she got a surprising reception.
So I went in, and they all knew me, and some of the guys from the back came out to look at me, and I'm thinking, how weird is this? And of course it was because of the 18-inch. No, I had it blown up to 24 inches. And I just love the story.
Wow. In that drawing, your private parts are a little ambiguous.
Yes, intentionally, and that was part of the fun of it, because I was so wrecked. That's where the cancer was.
Oh.
And the other thing that's in my work is there's huge amount of humor in almost everything, and if you think you're looking at something funny, you're probably right. I made it look a little bit like it was a bag. So it's very intentional. I knew what I was doing. I think it's incumbent upon any artist to consider every total aspect of the piece they're making and not leave anything unthought about. It could be undone, it could be messy, but every single thing within the parameters should be considered in one way or another.
Anne may talk a good game about dissociation and denial, but I think it's their opposite that has enabled her to thrive as an artist. She has the strength and the ability to see the truth of things and reimagine that truth as art. One of the most moving images she showed me was this small drawing. It's a depiction of the severe pain she felt when she had cancer. Plus, that sense of humor never lets her down. Before I left, I pulled this photo of her dad out from between some of her books. She adored this colorful character, despite his occasional bossiness.
Sissy, you never, ever draw one of those.
Don't you ever draw one of those.